Hong Kong for Specialists. I'm doing this in a methodology that's according to exhibiting classes or categories. So there's postal history, which is subdivided into treaty ports, which is old stuff from the 1800s to the early 1900s, and then branch post offices, which is more recent. And then I'm going to cover the traditional class with a pretty modern issue from the 1960s, the 50s and 60s. And then I'm going to talk about revenues, which it'll be like an overview of revenues from Hong Kong, and there'll be a conclusion. This is not by any means an exhaustive discussion, specializing very deeply in one aspect. It's illustrative and meant to be inspiring to philatelic specialists or people who want to specialize. And it's on the subject of Hong Kong, but it can really be applied to any country or subject of your choosing. So I hope this inspires you. All right, postal history. To start with, we're talking about treaty ports. And treaty ports are a group of 12 cities around the coast of mainland China, including an inland river port. Here's the map of the treaty ports. You see the names. Some of them are famous names like Shanghai and Canton, which is the origin of Cantonese cuisine. Hankow is that inland port. It's on the Yangtze River, so it is a port, but it's not on the coast. There were also treaty ports in Japan, and there was one in Formosa, now called Taiwan. And there was even a British post office that used Hong Kong stamps in Bangkok. It's not listed formally as a treaty port, but it has the same principle, that it was a place that used Hong Kong stamps and had the port, whether Bangkok or Shanghai or any of these other cities, canceled on their stamps. The term treaty port began to be used after the British and other Western countries forced China to open up to international trade after a centuries-long period of isolation. There were two so-called opium wars, and they resulted in treaties which established these treaty ports. After the first Sino-Japanese War, there was a treaty that then also ceded some ports in northern China. These here, Weihai Wei, Chifu, and Tientsin and Port Edward were ceded to British as military ports. They're not true treaty ports, but they are in the original sense, but they are places where British post offices had mailing privileges, and their namesake cancellations are on Hong Kong stamps. And you'll see some examples of that. As a matter of perspective, these treaties were called the unequal treaties by the Chinese because they were forced on them by military intervention. And to this day, China's point of view of this era is very different from our Western perspective. The current People's Republic of China leadership uses this period of national shame for political purposes. Back to Bangkok. Yeah, Bangkok was a whole other story, which is outside of the scope of this talk. But essentially, the British consulate in Bangkok allowed the use of Hong Kong stamps for the period before the Siamese post office was established. So in these treaty ports, initially consulates and eventually postal agencies and even fully functioning post offices were established in these cities. It resulted in postal markings that in the very early days were just barred obliterators, and you'll see some examples of that, and then subsequently circular date stamps with those cities' names. Hong Kong postage stamps were sent to these offices, and the resulting used stamps and covers from these places become a fascinating study for postal historians. So here are some examples of treaty port covers. So Shanghai is the major port. It's it's probably the largest city at the time in China, and it's still one of the largest cities in China. It's a competitor of Hong Kong, and a lot of the business between East and West was done there. And you see this barred obliterator cancel. So there's an S and a 1, and it's in blue ink. Shanghai had these obliterators both in blue and black ink, and depending on the period and the stamp issue, they have different values. There's another cancel on a Hong Kong stamp with Shanghai. This one is now later when they started using circular date stamps. So the whole point of treaty ports is finding Hong Kong stamps with these cancellations of the cities around the coast of China on them. I have a cover from Shanghai with a beautiful show of the S1 obliterator in black ink. This one is from 1869, and this was routed via Marseille, and it's got on the back a hand stamp, and the word Shanghai is spelled with an AE at the end. That's one thing you find in China when you travel there. Any English words are often spelled in a very random way. It's just a culture thing. And here's another example of a treaty port, Shanghai. In this case, a postcard going to Cape Verde, a pretty rare destination. This cancel is saying Shanghai British PO. It's a little bit hard to read here. Another major port, treaty port, was the port of Amoy. The modern name for Amoy is Xiamen with an Xiamen. And Amoy, this is a really cool cover going to Chile in 1901. And so from Amoy, it would travel to Hong Kong, cross the Pacific to probably San Francisco, and then have another ship take it down to Chile. There's a Union cancel there. And then finally it got to Rio Bueno, which is the name of the place where it was going finally. I studied this cover to find out, like, why was a cover going to Rio Bueno in Chile in that time? And also, the guy has a German-sounding name. It's a Mr. Dr. Oscar Geiss, Medico. So he's a medical doctor. And I looked that up and learned that this is southern Chile. It's not quite as far south as the Antarctic, or just, the super southern coast of Chile and Argentina where they meet. But it's about 2/3 of the way down the coast. And in that area, there's a little enclave of Germans because in the late 1800s, there was an encouragement in Germany for people to go to South America to settle. And he found this little enclave in Rio Bueno and that region. And to this day, there's a German, it's like Kitchener-Waterloo area. They have Oktoberfest, they have all kinds of Germanic practices and traditions there. So that was a cool thing to learn. And I even went on Facebook and checked out the name to see if there was any relative of this guy still alive. And I got an answer from a guy who said, yeah, I knew him. He was an uncle. So it was kind of cool to make that connection and to see a cover from that era and connected to the present, and to learn about how there was a German little colony down in southern Chile. Another Amoy cancel on a more recent 1921 stamp with the China overprint. You see a really clear lettering of the word. So I'm just going to go through quickly with all these cancels because there's a lot of varieties of these cancels. For the specialist, you can study these index markings, early and late dates, and all kinds of peculiarities about these cancels. Canton, that's probably the second biggest city in its time, and it's now called Guangzhou. It's a city with a population of something like 21 million people. I was there on a business trip, and it was just a mind-blowing city going on forever and ever. It's very close to Hong Kong. It's only about 90 miles up the river, the Pearl River, and I have the Canton cancellation on this Hong Kong Jubilee stamp of 1891, and that's very special because that Jubilee stamp, when it came out in January 1891, that was the first commemorative in Hong Kong, and people lined up to buy them all up, and it was only on sale for about a short time, like I think less than a week, and they all sold out, and most of them were canceled in Hong Kong, and most of them were favor canceled. You do find some commercially used ones, but that's very scarce. And you do find a few from treaty ports. And I'm very happy that I was able to find this Canton treaty port on the Jubilee stamp. Other Canton mail, this one is again a little bit later in 1917 from Canton going to Federated Malay States. And it's a lovely little cover, a red band cover, so-called, which was popularly used in China. And it has a complete story of when it left. It went through Singapore and then ended up going up to Perak, the city of Telok Anson. And you see that with all the Chinese writing on there, somebody from the post office wrote on Telok Anson in English so that in Malaysia they'd be able to know where that goes. Foochow is another treaty port, and here's one with a big F1 obliterator in blue. Foochow is a coastal city also in central southern China. And this is a really nice strike of the Foochow circular date stamp from 1899 on a pair of Victoria stamps. To find them in this good condition and the chop really full is very special. So I was very happy to get this. And you notice the name here is Foochow Fu. So there's another anomaly. The city's real name was Foochow, but for some reason, for a short period, they called it Foochow Fu. So just another Chinese nomenclature anomaly. Chifu is an important port in the north. It was a military base, and it was for the British, and it was also a center that had a lot of trade with the rest of the world. And it is here found on a $3 King George VI definitive, China overprint definitive, and you could see the Chifu in the bottom here in the cancellation. This is cool because it's a treaty port cancellation, but it's also really cool because it's on a pair of $3, which is they had a $5 and a $10, but any of the higher dollar values are really cool to get. So to get a pair of them is a lot of fun. One thing on these China overprints of the Hong Kong that were on the Georgia 6th issues, by definition, every China overprint stamp was only issued in a treaty port, not in Hong Kong itself. So you will never see these China overprint stamps with Hong Kong cancels. You'll only always see them with treaty port cancels. Liu Kung Tao. This is an interesting location because it had It's also one of those northern locations, and there was a mainland, there was a little island, and there was a military base. So you had Liu Kung Tao, Port Edward, and Weihai Wei. Weihai Wei was 50 miles down the road from Liu Kung Tao, and they're all together up there. So this postcard to Malta was mailed from Liu Kung Tao, sent to Shanghai, and then made its way to Europe. Ended up in Malta. In postal history, you are supposed to study the rates, and I do that, but I have to say that's my weak part. I'm good on not rates, routes. I'm good on rates. I have all the literature, and I've studied rates, and I know them pretty cold. But routing is one of my challenges, and that's something in postal history you do need to be able to identify rates and routes. And like I say, I admit to that being one of my weak points. Ningbo, very important city. In the early days, it was a smaller city, but it's just down the river from Shanghai, and it was called Ningpo with a P-O. Today, it's called Ningbo with a B-O. It's got some fabulous history there. I've been there, and it's a very interesting city. And the cool thing about this, besides the very socked on the nose cancel on the King Edward stamp in 1912, is that it's February 29th. It's a leap year day cancel. All right, so that's it for treaty ports. There's a lot more. I didn't get into the Japanese ones, and I didn't get into Bangkok, as I said. But that's just to give you a taste of what's out there and what kind of cancels you can find from Hong Kong treaty ports. And hopefully that's something you can get into. There's a lot of value to some of them. So there's also fakes, and you have to have all the literature and and be a member of the specialist societies to make sure that you don't buy fakes of these things. But it's a real fun thing to collect Hong Kong stamps with those treaty port cancels. So now we'll talk about branch post offices. So this starts in 1898 because Hong Kong was founded in 1840, and they grew at first slowly, and then their commerce took off because they were the conduit to China, the trade between China and the rest of the world. And so Hong Kong was the place to get goods into China and out of China. And as the city grew, and this little portion down here, that's Hong Kong Island. And then you have the Kowloon Peninsula there, just across the channel from Hong Kong. And the harbor of Hong Kong is on the left side of Kowloon there. And then you have all this other territory that's called the New Territories. And then you have some islands, some of which were inhabited and some of which were actually had post offices. The one I'll draw your attention to is Chung Chau here, which was a place where a lot of the missionaries had their homes. So that's an overview of Hong Kong. And there are some names here that you'll see that are branch post office, including Stanley down on the southern coast of Hong Kong Island. In 1898, Hong Kong had grown enough population and enough business complexity that it needed two branches. And one was done in what they called Western Branch, which is, if you see this name Central here, it was just a little bit west of that, beside the Y of Kennedy Town. That branch eventually changed its name to Sheungwan, and you'll see some examples of that. And then Kowloon, the other major part of Hong Kong, just the bay, got its own branch in 1898. And I'll be showing you some examples of those post offices on stamps. from 1912 to the 1940s, some smaller branch offices were established, especially in the new territories, where there was just small towns, not a lot of mail, but they did have requirements to mail and receive mails, and they were operated out of police posts. That was not well documented, and we've only found this out through cover evidence and a little bit of sleuthing on the part of members of the Hong Kong Study Circle, and especially our group here in Toronto. John Wilson prominently has done a lot of research on the police posts, and there's some very interesting stories that go along with them. So there was and stamps and covers of that era with those branches are extremely scarce and extremely expensive, and they don't come up very often in auction, and when they do, people go crazy on them. So by 1941, there was 22 branches in total. 1941 is sort of a watershed year because that's when the World War II came to Hong Kong, and a lot of the post offices were shut down during the occupation. The Japanese overcame Hong Kong, and the occupation forced a lot of those places to shut down. Some of them were destroyed. And after World War II, they had to rebuild everything. And Hong Kong's economy built up very quickly after World War II, and they needed more branch post offices. So there was a proliferation of branches after World War II. Today, there's 184, and that's counting ones that are some are obsolete, but there's 184 branch post offices you can collect with cancellations on the stamps or covers. Modern postal history, so post World War II, there's some really affordable material and a lot of research possibilities to make discoveries, because there's still a lot of post offices that, we found in one of them that they had a mistake on the cancel, a modern one, in a place called Morrison Hill Road, where they called it by mistake Hong Hong instead of Hong Kong. So there's all kinds of interesting stuff you can find on modern branch post office. And we'll go to have a look at some of these. So this is the first one, Kowloon Branch. So they called it KB in 1898 when it opened. And it opened on July 1st, 1898. And I got this at Capex 96. And it's one of the earliest ones. I was told, or the literature says, this is predating the earliest one, which was July 23rd. But I've been told by some of my Hong Kong buddies in the Hong Kong Philatelic Society that they have somebody as a July 19th. So it's maybe not the absolute earliest, but it is a very early date. And then there is, it was recorded till somebody said that it's they have a 19. Oh yeah, and even though the post office opened on July the 1st, the proof strike for this is dated July 16th. So there's an early Kowloon Branch cover, KB, on the bottom of the cancellation. It's 1908, going to Argentina. Always nice to have a rare destination. There's a really, really cool book that was set of books that was put out by the China Philatelic Association and the Hong Kong Post Office itself. In 2014, they published a 4-volume book that illustrates all the branch post offices of Hong Kong, past and present. And I'll show you a cover of that book. It's low. We do have one at the Harry Sutherland Library. So if you want to get into specializing in branch post office, we have the Bible on it. Here's that Western Branch, which later on changed its name to Shengwan. There's an earlier one where in 1919 they still call it Western Branch. You see the cancellation with the Western BR at the bottom. And then I think it was 1921 that they changed to a Chinese name, which was Shengwan. And here's a couple of examples. In 1936, you have it in two words, Sheng and Wan. And in 1941, they had already made it into one name, just Shengwan as one word. What this also illustrates for the specialist is you don't only find these cool cancels on stamps or covers. This is a registration receipt, and all kinds of receipts and parcel cut fronts and so on are other ways to collect branch post office postal history. So it's you can look in a lot of different places to find these branches. And from this registration receipt, you can also find out where it's going because it's written on there, Kobe, which is in Japan. So this was for a registered letter going to Japan. All right, and here is a really cool full strike of the Sai Ying Poon branch in 1915. That was pretty close to its opening. Its opening was in 1912. So this is a nice, it's always nice when you get a full strike of this. And this is a early type of Sai Ying Poon cancellation. So when you're looking at Hong Kong stamps in a circuit book, look for the cancels. And if you see something with funny names on it, it's either a branch or it could be a treaty port. Stanley, that's that southern town on Hong Kong Island. It's famous for a couple of reasons. It's sort of a resort type of area with a beach, and a lot of Westerners live there. During the war, though, there was also a prison there, which was infamous because there was all kinds of atrocities that the Japanese committed, and it was not a pleasant place to be during the Japanese occupation. This cover is going to Philippines in 1940, just before the occupation. And what's cool about this is the social history. It's going to a radio station, KZRH, the Voice of the Philippines. And it's going to a DJ called the Nighthawk, who's taking requests. There was probably a request to play a song for somebody's sweetheart. This is always another part of postal history. You get social history along with it, and that's a beautiful thing to be holding history in your hands. Cheung Chau, that's that little island I showed you down southwest of Hong Kong. It's populated by mostly the Western population on Cheung Chau was mostly missionaries. And you could see this is a missionary letter going to Cameroon. 1941. The chop is a little bit hard to see, but you could make out the CHEUN, and the Chow is a little bit hard to read. But this is a Cheung Chau letter. 5 cents was the printed matter rate, and it was probably a greeting card. We're not sure what it was. And it went to Cameroon and got redirected. And you could see it was Reverend and Mrs. Halstead Gates, Cheung Chau, Hong Kong, going to the American Presbyterian Mission in Cameroon. So this is definitely missionary mail. But another cool thing is it got censored in England. So it was not opened by censor in Hong Kong, according to this marking. But then you have the censor tape here, Examiner 400, and that's a British one. And the censors, after opening it and then resealing it, wrote in the names that they were covering up with the tape. Very nice of them to do that, very considerate. And oh yeah, there's a better picture of that cancel that you can't make out here. The this is late usage. This cancel originated in the 1920s, and by the 1940s, those inner circle had deteriorated. but it is a Chung Chao X. You could just almost make out that faint bit of the X. According to the books, there is no other Chung Chao cancel of that era, so it's not a variety, a new type of cancel. It's that one, but just very worn. Kowloon City, that's another part of Kowloon, and it's got its own cancellations. Kowloon City, Hong Kong. This one is from 1938. What's cool about this one, besides the fact that it's coming from the branch post office, you can see the progression. So it was mailed in Kowloon City at 1 p.m. Then it got to Kowloon main branch post office at 3:30 on that same day, 3rd of August, 1939. And at 4:30, it made it to Hong Kong to get onto a plane to go to New Zealand. And that shows you how efficient the post office worked in those days. And the rate is also a good one because it's 15 cents for airmail. So that is the all-up rate, the Empire airmail scheme that was introduced in 3 stages. And when it got introduced to Hong Kong, the rate changed from $1.30 for airmail down to 15 cents. So everybody, for British Empire destinations, you could get your mail sent really cheaply. That ended when World War II started in Europe. Kowloon Tong, another section of Kowloon. This one going to England in 1940. It's going to it's a short-lived branch. It was only open for 8 years, 33 to 41. Besides collecting the cancels, some of the branches also have their own registration labels. So that's a really cool one when you can get a registered letter with the branch name on its registration label. Sham Shui Po, one of the bigger post offices. This one has a nice cancellation, 25 cents rate by surface to Philippines. And another really interesting thing of this is going to a Hong Kong evacuee. So in 1940, people were starting to leave Hong Kong or be evacuated because they knew there was going to be an invasion. They didn't have it, it wasn't set in stone, but they were being told, okay, women and children better to get out of the colony and go somewhere safer. And so this lady ended up going down to Melbourne. Well, she ended up in different places. They got rerouted a few times. But I have more evacuee mail. It's another interesting social history aspect. Yau Ma Tei, that's the last one I'm showing here. Yau Ma Tei is on Kowloon side. It's just a little bit north of that southern tip of Kowloon. They had their own post office for a long time. It's closed in the meantime, but it's nice to get an airmail cover. Pre-war branch post office airmail covers are very desirable because there's not a lot of them around. After 1945, when the Japanese occupation was ended, there's a lot of airmail from both Hong Kong General Post Office and from branch post offices, but pre-war airmail covers from branches are scarce. Yau Ma Tei, here's one just to show you how beautiful it could be with a nice cancel on a large block. When you get a large block with a branch post office cancel, that's just a thing of beauty for us specialists looking for that kind of stuff. All right, and there's that book I was talking about. There's 4 volumes of this thing going through all the branches from A to Z. If you add them all up, there's 1,152 pages to go through, and it gives you a really good overview of what it is you can collect. It's such a complex and diverse area. It's one that it's either a lifelong pursuit, or you specialize in just one section or one branch or a group of branches or something, because it's impossible to get them all. But hey, I'm trying. I'm keeping going with this. And the good thing about this one, it goes into 1914. So up to 1997, Hong Kong was a British colony, and in 97 it reverted to China as a special administrative region, and this covers the early cancels of the SAR era. So this is a very timely book. The Postal History tome of Edward Proud also shows all the branch post offices, but it only goes up to 1997. All right, so we're going to go to traditional, which is the basic, the exhibiting term for showing stamps or studying a stamp or a group of stamps. So I'm showing a traditional exhibit on the 5-cent Queen Elizabeth Wilding portrait definitive from 1954. So usually in a exhibit, you have to show some pre-production material such as original artwork, essays, proofs, and such like. This issue has very little publicly available pre-production material. I've seen generic remnants of the frame design proofs in auctions, and these go for astronomical sums, and it's not even possible to assign them to a particular stamp usually. So I don't have any of this stuff. But there are lots of studies of various printings and varieties of the stamps, and that's well illustrated in my exhibit. And then the other thing you show in a traditional exhibit is usage of the stamp on covers, parcel fronts, and other uses. So I have that in my exhibit, and I will be showing that in this one. So January 5th, 1954 was the first definitive set of stamps featuring the new Queen. It was adopted from the first issue of the 1860s of Hong Kong definitives with Queen Victoria. And I don't have an example of that here, but the same design was used for Queen Victoria, King George VI, and Queen Elizabeth. And I love that they had that continuity of design. Very simple, highly effective. The printing process was typography. And let's take a look at it. There's lots of varieties in this issue. So the 5-cent, one of the listed varieties is this one with the broken pearl and the crown. So you see at the top here is a little crown. It's a little bit hard to see. So I blew it up, and there's the variety. One pearl doesn't have a full closure. It's actually a fatter line with no bottom. So that's in this stamp here. It's a little bit hard to see the arrow, but yeah, it's in the multiple there. So there's a positional block for it. There's also these kind of varieties, perforation flaws. This is a paper fold in the margin when it was printed, and it somehow got through the inspection process and was sold. It probably was, it might have even been noticed by the inspection process, but these stamps would have been good to be used, so they might have let it through. But either way, whether it was an error of inspection or if it was purposely allowed to go through, it's a real cool one to have, because not only are the perfs on edge here, but you could see a little bit of color of the orange printing alongside those perfs of the Jubilee lines. There was a lot of printing. So this stamp was around from 1954 to 1962. It went through 9 different printings, and those requisition numbers at the top, there was 9 different ones. And I have a table where I show it, but I don't think I have it on this. So here's another variety that occurred with this 5-cent stamp. It was a imperforate. 2 sheets from the 8th printing of Requisition T were issued, and the top 9 rows were imperforate, and the 10th row was perforated at the sides and bottom only. So these were sheets of 100. So if 9 rows, that would be 90, and if it's 2 sheets, it makes 180 of these stamps in imperforate condition and 20 part perforate stamps. This one is the requisition corner block of one of those 2 sheets. So there's only 2 possible. This is one of the highlights of my whole stamp collection, to have one of 2 known imperforate requisition blocks. That's what I built my exhibit around. Once I acquired that block, and I have to say I did acquire that at a North Toronto stamp auction some years ago. John Wilson alerted me to it, that it was going to come up, and I came and spent a lot of money on it, but definitely it was worth it, and I'm proud to have this. And so I built this exhibit around that feature. So talking about usage of that stamp, yeah, so this is a first day cover, January 5th, 1954, going locally with a 5-cent stamp and nothing else. What's cool about this is also the cachet, which says post offices in Hong Kong and new territories and GPO Hong Kong are listed here. So this lists all the post office, branch post offices that were around during that time. So in a traditional exhibit, you have a illustration of branch post offices, and I'll be showing some of these stamps used on in branches. So here's one with the P requisition from a branch post office called So Ook in 1960. This is a first day of opening of the post office, and you notice the registration label doesn't say So Ook, it says Kowloon. So it took on the name of its general post office. And then you can have some really interesting commercial usage of just that stamp on a cover. So this is a 1955 block of 10 and an extra marginal copy to make up 55 cents. And that rate is for double weight postage and 30 cents registration fee. So that's a really cool showing the usage of the stamp that is being studied. Here's another one that sort of ends this exhibit, showing the stamp that I'm studying, the Queen Elizabeth 5-cent Wilding, and the next one that replaced it, another orange with the Antigone portrait. The beauty of this cover is also the destination, Aruba and Netherlands in Antilles, and the fact that it was missent before it got to where it was going. It looks a little bit philatelic, but I don't care. I love this cover. It's got a lot of power to it. And now we are going to talk about revenues. So revenues as an exhibiting class are a world unto themselves and exist for most countries, and Hong Kong is no exception. Evidence of revenue payments was first by means of embossing the documents. And here's some examples of embossed paper that shows that revenue was paid. It's called Stamp Office. They have the date here, 22nd of March, and in the bottom there, that's a 92, and 25 cents was paid for something. I don't know. I just have it as a little cutout, so I don't know what exactly it paid for. And at the bottom, there's another one with 50 cents on it. These things are extremely scarce. You don't see them around. They don't come up for auction very often or anything like that. So I'm very happy to have just a couple of them. But they also had a lot of adhesive stamps, and I'll be showing a bunch of them. Stamp duty adhesive stamps in Hong Kong were issued as early as 1867. In the Victorian era, as well as more recently, revenue stamps were authorized for postage owing to shortages of postage stamps. The reverse happened several times in the King George V and King George VI era, where stamps were authorized for revenue usage. So we'll talk about that when I show some examples. So the four kinds of revenue that were used in Hong Kong are bill of exchange, contract note, receipt, and stamp duty. And I'll show an example of each one of them. There are lots of other revenue categories possible. A place like India or Great Britain or Ireland, they have 30 and more revenue stamp categories. So they have military ones, they have public works, they have all kinds of institutions where they use stamps to pay revenue, but not postage. So here's some examples. So the Queen Victoria stamp duty, they're beautifully designed large format stamps. Here's a 25-cent one. The King Edward's, this was now a duty plate design, very, very beautifully put together with different color. These are long sets that I'm not showing the whole set. I'm just showing examples of each one. King George V had the same basic design as King Edward. And you see they always have the date, 31st of January, 1927. This one you can't make out, but they were always embossed for the different duties that they paid. And then there's one that was overprinted B of E to make it a stamp used for a bill of exchange. A bill of exchange would be a check or a money order or an actual bank instrument called a bill of exchange. King George VI, it got a lot more complicated. So you have bills of exchange, and I'm showing some varieties. They had it sometimes overprinted B of E. Then they had this different kind of lettering, B of E, and even an overprint, 15 cents on 20 cents. And then this kind of diagonal bill of exchange. Then you had stamp duty. So stamp duty in the George VI era was with a sort of generic looking stamp with just 15 cents. Sorry, that's a typo there. It's not 5 cents, it's 15 cents. And the HEC stands for Hong Kong Electric Company. So I have documents where somebody's paying his electricity bill to the Hong Kong Electric Company, and that stamp is on it. They had to pay 15 cents for the receipt to prove that they paid it. And then there's a receipt stamp that is an overprint on the stamp duty stamp, 15 cents on 10 cents. And again, finding documents with these things is not completely hard, but it's fun to see what kind of services were offered. So here's some King George VI definitives that were overprinted for revenue usage. So this 8-cent stamp, which I've done a major study on just itself, in 1946, they ran short of 5-cent receipt stamps and overprinted the 8-cent ones, of which they had all kinds of them. They had lots of them printed after the war. And the 8-cent rate became obsolete. Actually, in 1948, it became obsolete because 8 cents was the rate for a letter to China. And in 1948, that went up to 10 cents. So this stamp had no usage after, and it was very handy for them to take the massive stocks they had and overprint them for receipt stamps for which they needed more. They also used some 30-cent stamps and a 10-cent, which they overprinted as a receipt stamp. And because this is a 10-cent stamp, that's what it was used for as revenue. You never or almost never see these with postal cancels. they're not allowed to be used. Once they're overprinted for revenue usage, they're not allowed to be used for postal usage. Here's an example of one of those documents. And again, this is one of those cool things of social history. So you got the 10-cent stamp duty and the 5-cent receipt stamp making 15 cents, which pays for the privilege of getting this receipt. Somebody paid water charges for the month and rental. So it's the public billiard saloon, and they paid $580 rent for a 7th floor room. You have the room numbers there in 1949, and that paid for rental and water charges. So it's a really cool little bit of social history as well as commercial, and how everything had a little tax on it, that even to get a receipt, you had to pay 15 cents tax to prove that you paid it. Queen Elizabeth gets super complex. They had these beautiful Wilding style stamps with the stamp duty imprint on the bottom. And there's lots of these in a lot of different varieties of printings and color combinations. They're overprinted to bill of exchange, again with 2 different types of fonts. So you can go crazy on this because the values go from like 5 cents up to $500. And I do have a high value. And they also ran out of some occasionally and had to overprint to make up for shortages. So the $60 stamp was needed, so they overprinted one of them. And there's a nice high value one, $100 stamps in a block of 4 for contract notes. And then in the 1980s, they changed the design with the Machen portrait of the Queen, and it went from $6 up to, I think the highest one is $1,400. I just show a couple of examples of the kind of design they had starting in 1980. And these things became obsolete in the 90s because then everything was either meters, or nowadays it's not even indicated by meters. It's just done online. So here's some examples of Queen Elizabeth usage of, here's a bill of exchange. So this is it's essentially a check or a bank draft. And it's somebody in Hong Kong paying, what's the amount? I can't make it out here. Anyways, yeah, $1,643. Okay, so the next one is a stock purchase receipt, and somebody had to pay $2,316 of government contract stamps, contract notes, in addition to brokerage commission for the purchase of a whole bunch of shares, like, 30,000 shares of Hong Kong land in totaling 770,000 Hong Kong dollars. So this is a cool transaction in 1980 of, they had to pay that much as some revenue to the government for making a purchase of stocks. The bureaucracy of Hong Kong was very much in line with the British bureaucracy, but this is over the top as far as I'm concerned. But hey, it's a nice document to have. And yeah, so then I'm just showing revenue stamps which are repurposed as postage. So in the 1880s, they didn't have any higher value, face value of a postage stamp than 96 cents. And because the economy of Hong Kong was growing and expanding, they needed to mail stuff that cost way more than 96 cents. So they authorized for use for postage some of the high value stamp duty stamps. And there was nothing overprinted or anything. It was just allowed to be used. So if you find them with postal cancellations, quite often these are revenue stamps that were used for postage. There's also a $5 and a $10 in that set, and a $3. And then in 1938, they had a shortage of 5-cent definitive stamps. And so what they allowed was the usage of 5-cent revenue stamps as postage for 7 days. For 9 days, from 11th to 20th of January. And that's a desirable, it's desirable to get these on cover, but there's a ton of philatelic covers. This one, it might be philatelically inspired, but it went to a really cool destination, again, Aruba in Dutch West Indies. And it was on the first day that the provisional stamps, use of revenue stamps was allowed. So it was only for 9 days. So getting a commercially used cover that went through the mail. And on top of that, this is also from the Wan Chai branch. So this has got a multi-featured cover. And then we have stamps that were repurposed as revenue. So that's what I talked about in my introduction. Here's a 12-cent stamp from the George V era that was repurposed for stamp duty and 10 cents because they had run out of 10-cent stamp duty stamps. There's a Queen Elizabeth one. Even in Queen Elizabeth's time, they needed 15-cent stamp duty stamps. They didn't have any of those ones that I showed before, so they overprinted this one. And then, of course, there's George VI, which is my favorite era. They took those postage stamps and overprinted them as contract notes. And they even used $1 stamps and made them 10 cents for revenue stamps. So you could see them repurposed in two directions, from revenue to postage or from postage to revenue. So that's the end of my talk. I just will run through. Hong Kong Philately offers really cool opportunities for specialization. If you're looking for something to specialize in, Hong Kong is a great place to go because there's so many different aspects you can do. It's historically significant because of the China trade and all the history associated with China, which reflects on our situation today in the world. There's enough complexity to challenge anybody. I mean, the complexity of just the branch post office it could be a lifelong pursuit. There's still discoveries being made in all these sections that I talked about. And there's a few different Hong Kong societies. The main one that I participate in is the Hong Kong Study Circle, and our Toronto group, the B62 guys, of which Michelle and George and John Wilson and Sam Chu are members. We meet 4 times a year, and once a year we just get together socially and have a Chinese dinner. And of course, there's some fabulous literature abounding, so your research a lot of it has been done for you already. I do have a page of references, and I offer to make those available to anybody who wants to get into this, because there's a lot of Hong Kong literature, and you need to have some of this stuff, or at least access it at the Harry Sutherland Library. And I'll point out, since Michelle spoke up, Michelle's book on Bangkok is one of the books that showed us some new discoveries in Hong Kong as a quasi branch. Bangkok as a quasi branch, quasi treaty port.